had impacts with, you know, the Chris Stone project, and it has impacts. The AB 1600 study actually is even broader than simply fire mitigation fees. It also deals with infrastructure and impact fees for that, and that's another use of that traffic information. So that was very pivotal information. Getting it completed had an impact in a lot of different arenas. But that was one area we've had to deal with. The other one is that there was no provision for greenhouse gases or climate change, unless somebody, you know, basically was a clairvoyant, which there may well be some people. But that wasn't on the radar screen. Certainly in any of the past versions of UVAP, and not even, quite frankly, when we let the contract for the EIR this time around. So that's something that we've had to add in. The other thing, interestingly enough, in this latest contract for EIR with Leonard Charles and Associate, it was limited to, and I can't remember the number, but like 200, 250, 300 pieces of input from the public in response to the release of the draft EIR. When it comes out, they said, okay, well, we'll budget enough to respond to 250 to 300 pieces of information. I think the last one got something like 1,000. I mean, clearly, I don't know if it was wishful thinking or what, but that was not addressed adequately. Our recent augmentation to the Leonard Charles contract did address that particular issue. We felt there wasn't even any reason to go into the public review with such a inadequate number of responses budgeted for. And then finally, the water analysis. As we've come up to that point in the development of the EIR and looked at water, it's clear that there's more analysis needed. And that is not only looking at over the last 20 years. I think the sophistication around how we deal with water and the legal requirements around how we deal with water, we're in a different century than we were before. And it's incumbent upon us that our EIR reflect that. So, and even our EIR consultant, when we were discussing it, described that section of the EIR as light. Kind of said EIR light, which you can only imagine what my reaction was to hearing that. So I would refer you then to the contract, which hopefully you all have in front of you. Yes? Okay. And the in particular, the scope of work. So that scope of work came as a result of discussions among Phil Gorney, the planning team manager, chief, and Roland Sanford, your water agency director, and outside consultants regarding water and water analysis and water in EIRs. And so that's what came out of this. The bidding process, I guess this would be considered a request for information. A number of parties who expressed interest were given the basic information of what we were looking for, and they responded. The proposal from West Yost happened to be one of the more expensive ones. It also happened to be the most realistic in terms of time frames, and it also happened to be the one that was most thorough in what they said that they could do. What we are trying to do here is a program level water supply analysis. As you know, the EIR associated with the Ukiah Valley Area Plan, General Plan, et cetera, is a program level. So you have a program level EIR. This would be a program level water supply assessment. It is a given that any specific projects will need a project level EIR, and they will need a project level water supply analysis, and in fact they will need a SB 610 study in all likelihood specific to their project. But what we're trying to do is put together an EIR that's responsive, that is legally responsive and responsible to the citizens for whom we're planning, and for the county's sponsorship of that Ukiah Valley Area Plan. You can see in the scope of work, they talk about what information they will be gathering. I want to be clear, this is not just gathering data, however. It is getting the data, and it is analyzing that data, and it is drawing conclusions that are then incorporated into the EIR. So this is not simply a data gathering exercise, because at that level, at least some data could be gathered simply by staff. The data gathering is the least of the concerns. It's what you do with that data, where you go with that data, and the conclusions you draw from that data. So in discussing this with people, the concerns that were expressed had to do with the overall cost of the project, what exactly was involved in this water supply analysis, the necessity for it. Clearly, the necessity for it is we are in keeping with what is happening with program-level EIRs throughout the state at this point. I think there were some assumptions that some of the requirements only applied to projects. That is not the case. When there's a project level, but when you back up to the program level, there is clearly a higher level of water analysis than was required in the past. The other concerns that I heard expressed had to do with MSRs and the relationship of this study to MSRs. Roland will be able to speak more specifically to the difference between MSRs and the water supply analysis. But yes, there is some movement by LAFCO to try and get MSRs moving, and each water district needs to supply the MSRs. The water supply analysis, though, is not an MSR. It goes beyond that. It certainly could use some data if it were already available in an MSR, and by the same token, information that's gained through this will ultimately help the water districts and LAFCO to do MSRs. But they're not the same thing, and LAFCO's time frame for completing these MSRs isn't any firmer than it has been over the last several years. I think there's a push now towards the end of this year, but it's not going to be done in any time frame that would allow the Ukiah Valley Area Plan to move forward. So before I turn it over to Roland, I want to say one more thing, and that has to do with urgency. Whatever urgency means in the planning process, I've figured out it means different things than I thought it did. What I think urgency means in the planning process is you keep the fires burning so you keep moving forward, because if you don't, you start rolling backwards. And so we need to stay on track. We need to keep moving forward. And there are all sorts of reasons why the Ukiah Valley Area Plan needs to be brought to completion, because I believe that there are people, you know, both as individuals and as businesses, who are wanting to see what that vision is, and then to work with that according to whatever direction the board sets. And I think that after 20-some years, we owe it to people to complete this process. And so our commitment is to just keep and slogging through until we complete it according to the work plan that we've given you. So if you don't have any specific questions for me, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Roland to speak more specifically to the scope of the water study and its relationship to MSRs.
Okay, before we do that, Supervisor Smith?
I think the question's more appropriate for Roland.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Mr. Sanford.
Thanks for warming them up. Roland Sanford, Mendocino County Water Agency General Manager. I think the short answer here with the relationship between this water availability study and the MSR is that the MSR is a broader, wider array of topics that are covered at a more general level. For example, the MSR, besides addressing infrastructure and infrastructure needs, water availability in a general sense also addresses rate structure